welcome to Impossible Coin. This week's episode is a little bit different. It's not Rocky Tegan and I talking about the news and what we've been playing. This is one of our interview episodes. We wanted to set aside some time and talk with Kimmo Lahtinen about the game that we've been ranting and raving about on the show, Day Repeat Day. Thank you for making time.
Thank you. Good to be here. This is the first time I'm ever on a podcast, so it's interesting.
I am definitely glad that I was able to coax you into doing it. You definitely were, is it fair to say, worried? You're like, I'm not sure I have enough interesting stuff to say. And if your body of work is any indication, then I think there's lots of exciting stuff that we could talk about. So I'm glad that we were able to put aside some time.
Okay.
I guess the first thing I wanted to do was just absolutely gush about your game. I think it's possible that the universe is conspiring to make sure that, like, right now, Day Repeat Day is my undisputed favorite game of the year thus far, because for some reason the disk drive on my Xbox chose this weekend to fail, so I haven't had a chance to play Resident Evil 8 yet. But wow, what an amazing game. What an absolutely amazing game. And after playing it and then digging into your body of work after discovering it, it was even more surprising just to see how much of a radical departure it was for you from your previous work. So, like, I think the first thing I wanted you to, like, share some insight into and talk about is that, like, in just about every place that you do talk about Day Repeat Day online, you mentioned that, like, the genesis of this game is like a comment or an inquiry from a friend. Like, someone said, like, I bet you can't make a mastery puzzler, or would you make a mastery puzzler? Like, that's kind of interesting to me. And then, by all accounts, if I just, like, look at your Twitter timeline and read back, like, it appears to be that, like, this conversation happened in 2018. So it seems to be like this social inquiry that then, like, led to 3 years of game development. Do I have my timeline on that right?
Yeah, it's about right. When 2018, I finished my last game, Barbarian, and I had to figure out a new project. And I was that discussing with a friend thing is kind of not exact 100% how it happened, but my friend likes match-3 games and has always been frustrated with the free-to-play games and has been asking me, like, why don't you do a good premium match-3 game so I could play it? And to me that sounds like a dead end and no way something I could do or compete with. But then 2018, after Barbarian, I had to figure out a new project, and there was this government art grant that had its time you could apply for it, and I wrote a quick suggestion that why don't I do this kind of a match-3 game, which is very subversive. There was no story. It was only about match-3 in a way that it gets worse and worse all the time. First you match fruits and diamonds and then, I don't know, meat, and then weapons and drugs, and kind of like try to get the player to realize that what am I doing? And even though the game is super fun, but the themes get really weird, and should I be playing this or not? And that was kind of my pitch to the art grant thing, but it wasn't that good of a pitch, and it never went anywhere. I didn't get the grant, and I forgot the whole concept at that point. And then I started working on other game concepts, but they didn't really go anywhere, or I was too ambitious and didn't get them going. And eventually I came back to the match-3 and thought that I'm just gonna do it on my own, because Barbarian had done well enough that I could do this game and not make it commercial. I could do whatever I wanted. So that's kind of how I started doing this version of this game.
Okay.
So yeah, and this took like 1.5 years of doing. I first imagined I would get it done in 6 months, but then it kind of spiraled out of hand like all game projects do.
Right. Is one of the reasons that the game spiraled out of control the narrative component to it? One of the things that really resonated with me and stuck with me are the seemingly really diverse branching narratives in the game. And I have to imagine that took a pretty significant amount of time in writing.
Yeah, well, that's basically when I started, and that's how I usually work with games, that I let them take control and take me to where they're going. And, the match 3 concept was really shallow, and I didn't like it, so I had the idea to add a story to it and try to make it deeper and have some kind of a story arch, and, you know.
One of the things that really stuck with me is how vibrant and how real every one of the characters that you message with during the game seem. Not to, I guess, give away what feels like the game's like big final reveal, but like in the interim, all of the characters who you interact with via the in-game chat at work all feel very, very real. Trying to decide whether or not to move to the suburbs with your wife, or whether or not you're going to give your alcoholic brother more money, like all of this stuff has like a resonance of truth to it. There's an authenticity to these conversations. I wanted to find out like where this came from. Like, are you drawing from personal experience? Where did these stories come from?
Well, of course there's some personal experience in there, but it's not like my life or anything. It's more like my frustration about how life in general works, or and I think I'm allowed to go much deeper in that kind of real life stories, because these other characters aren't there to serve the player. They're not like quest givers or something that you kind of play. They're living their own life and you're just a part of it. You're not trying to get something out of them. You're not trying to get experience points, or so I can write that kind of short stories that have kind of a deeper meaning without thinking about how does this affect the gameplay, if you know what I mean.
There's been so much storytelling in games in the last 10 years which try to establish itself as having some kind of like moral complexity to the narrative, but like very often the choices like boil down to like bake a batch of cookies or like shove your grandma in a furnace, and it was like very, very clear what is good and what is bad. And there were like so many moments in your game where as a character I was met with choice, and like there wasn't something that necessarily like felt right or felt wrong, but whatever choice I picked felt personal. Like one of the ones that like I think stuck with me the most was when your wife's father passes away and she like raises to the character the idea of, do we want children?
Yeah.
And I was like, there's no signposting in the narrative in this moment as to like something which is like, viewed by the designer as obviously a right or wrong choice. It was interesting because like there's definitely moments where like the match 3 play itself becomes like very, very frustrating to the player, either because like the board is divided into multiple segments and you can't directly interact with the pieces that you need to clear or whatever. But like the matching of 3 becomes like very, very frustrating, and it's very easy for the player to retreat to these conversations and go like, well, let me back away from this for a while and see what's going on in chat. Was that the gameplay loop as you foresaw it? Did you see people like, I guess, killing time at jokey and like being like chased away from the match 3 moment to moment and then retreating into the narrative loops?
Well, it kind of works both ways, I think. So if I was imagining that some people, like in real life, escape their like real life issues into their work, and the match 3 is kind of like that, and then the other way too. And I'm not sure if I intentionally made any match 3 level frustrating or anything, but there is a certain progression that I kind of thought about, that when you obviously get older each time the time moves on by many years. So when you're old, the work maybe becomes harder, and you're given more interesting tasks in a way in the center part of the game. And at the beginning, it's kind of a junior job, and the match 3 puzzles are easy too. But it's also kind of a good game progression that you get more complicated puzzles if you look at it that way. But the other storyline in itself, it was really important to me that it wouldn't be that kind of mainstream quest giver story where one choice is obviously good and one choice is obviously bad. Because, for example, I never play the bad option in any game, never. So those conversations just could, for all I care, go away because I always pick the one obvious option.
Right.
There's no point to the whole conversation, and that's the kind of thing I tried my hardest to avoid. That there's no good or bad, and you don't get a +1 if you're a good person or -1 if you're a bad person, and then that's +1 or ± is your entire character. Because in some games that do have these good, bad scales, and that's the only number they have in the behind the scenes for you. So you can play 90% of the game being really good, and then you shoot 3 people in the head, and then you get the good ending that because you're a saint and that number is really high.
Right.
That's the kind of storytelling that really rubs me the wrong way, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Sure. I think that there is like a phrase which gets excessive mileage in like game wonk criticism, but I think is exactly striking out what you're talking about, which is ludonarrative dissonance.
Yeah,
like this disconnection from the way the gameplay works and the story being told. I certainly don't want to like drag any particular company or franchise in particular, but like I can definitely think of like a few very, very big examples. Speaking more to like the world you created and the way that people connect with this space, something which stuck out a lot for me is the music. This like very spare, very minimal, filling in the crevices of the player's experience. It reminded me a lot of the way music works in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, where you're just wandering around this like vast, lonely world, which is again like part of the experience of Dare Repeat Day, where it's ultimately like a very lonely experience. And like there's moments where you're just like sitting there waiting for somebody to chat with you. And then just like these very minimal notes of music. What were you going for with the music? Because I absolutely think it cements this feeling that you were seemingly going for.
Yeah, so the music is made by my brother. He makes all the music for all of my games usually, and my concept to him was like, we're taking you through a life, and we want to keep it really, really simple. And I wrote a kind of a mood pitch for every day. Like at the beginning, you're just starting and trying to find your way, and then there are very few melodies and very few notes, and some notes might actually not sound that good because you're just learning the ways, and then it gets better, and at some point, like day 3 or 4, you're playing really good and everything seems great, and then at some point it starts to get darker, and it's all about keeping the mood with the conversation, and also keeping it really simple, And like you said, the loneliness is a really important part of it. There's just the piano because it's a solo instrument. There's not a band or not some kind of rhythm music or I don't know. It's just a one pretty piano and that's it. And like in other aspects, the game is really minimal. The interface, there's not much like this kind of what's really trendy nowadays. Lots of movement and that kind of futuristic things. It's just really minimal, and there's just the text you need, and that's it. That's kind of the same concept with the music, that there's the bare minimal you need, and that's the piano, and that's it.
So, speaking of the text you need, I'm very curious about some of the business phone numbers that you call throughout the game. The way they were designed and the ultimate arc of them, by the time you reach the end of the game, calling those numbers definitely seem to be part of the narrative climax of the game. But very early on, there's an enormous amount of variety to the type of available experiences that are possible by calling the numbers, down to one feeling like a pretty robust version of like playing adventure by calling a number. How did these come to be? What was the goal with them? And are there any rabbit holes for the players in these numbers? Like, are there narrative secrets for the larger game buried in those numbers?
Those hyperconnect numbers, as I call them, came in pretty late, actually. I think like 80% of the story was already written when I came up with those, and that was because the game was still feeling like it's missing a lot of depth, and also the phone number mechanic was really underused, and I just couldn't figure out what would be the best way to add it, because I didn't want to add any more people and conversations, because I was happy with the story at that point. But so I'd be lying if that hyperconnect was some kind of a master plan from the beginning, but when I started doing them, I thought it worked really well, and I wrote them really freely, as you can see by the variety, that whenever I came up with an idea about what kind of frustrates me, or just what I find interesting, or just did something that inspired me, I just put it in that hyper connection, and I think it works really nicely to break up the game a bit, and also I organized them so that they fit the narrative a bit too. So in late game you get those really dystopic hyperconnects, and maybe earlier you get those funnier ones, or so on. And as for the narrative, there are a few secrets in the game, but there's not that much of a rabbit hole there. But there are secrets, but I don't know, I probably shouldn't spoil everything.
I definitely understand. I know that I'm still banging my head against trying to figure out what the CAPTCHA is for one particular...
Yeah, that's a funny thing, because when I put that in, I was thinking that, oh no, this secret is so obvious, I should design something elaborate here, and but I'm running out of time, so I'm just gonna leave it like this. But the final result is that I don't think anyone has solved the CAPTCHA yet, so I think I have to spoil it or drop some hints at some point.
I know for a while I was convinced that there was no solution to the CAPTCHA, because that would fit nicely with the climax of the game, but...
Yeah, you're right in that it's on purpose designed the way that you can think that and not go away feeling bad, but there's also that kind of a little mystery that if you really like to poke into it, you actually can. But I guess I can reveal that much, that the solution to that is not in the chats at all. It's elsewhere.
Okay. All right. That'll definitely give me, and hopefully a few other folks, like a place to start.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in where the black and white footage, which happens in between days, came in during the development process. Like, where was the footage sourced from? Why was it included? Like, what was the goal with the footage between days?
So, the footage itself is from this Finnish national broadcasting company. They have a large archive of 100 years of everything, and they actually released some of that footage on a Creative Commons license, so it's free to use as long as you credit it properly. And I just love that archive, because there's such a variety of old strange stuff from years gone by, but what it actually is in the game, if we go full into the story, that it is revealed at the end, spoiler, that you're an AI, okay? So point is that you're being trained to replace a human, and you're gonna be a worker for the actual company, so that they can fire everyone, and so on. Like it's hinted in the story throughout. But the actual films is kind of in relation to that. I was imagining what an AI would see, how it would be trained, and what kind of data it would be fed, so that it gets knowledge about the world outside, and so that's the kind of an AI perspective, and to give you some kind of a clue to think about what's happening, but it's also very strange and weird on purpose, so you don't really get it probably straight away until after the fact of completing the game and seeing the reveal. At least I see it that way. I don't know how well it works actually. But,
right.
Yeah.
I kind of want to touch on a tweet of yours and kind of like how it dovetails the launch experience of the game. When Day Repeat Day launched, it seemed like during the first 24 to 36 hours of the game's release, there was a bug that some folks were experiencing where they wouldn't have anything in their task list for the day.
Yeah.
Right.
That was a just simple programming bug that had to do with different languages, and unfortunately I always run my operating system in English, and if someone has the other language, then it's had a programming bug and the text wasn't displayed. So
right. The reason I wanted to bring it up was there was a tweet that you made, I believe it was last year, where you said, a QA department is one of the biggest things I miss from my non-indie development. Wish I could afford one to break my game every day.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to like talk about the way QA is like valued in the industry and has like the experience of encountering that bug during launch change the way that you want to approach QA in the future? Like, do you see an alternative as an indie developer? Like, obviously, like the budget to bring someone in as an FTE to break your game is just simply not there at this scale. So how do you approach a problem like that?
Well, that situation could have been avoided by having more external testers, but this was such a small project that I only had a few and they happened to have a matching computer. But in all, if you happen to have a large circle of external testers, that helps a lot with that kind of simple bugs. But the way I develop my games is that I use automated testing a lot, and I try to program my games so that there are minimum opportunities for bugs to be. But this is kind of a complicated game, more complicated game than an action game, because I obviously cannot run through every dialogue option or every path of discussion, and I didn't have an automated test tool for that either, so it's really, really hard to test. And what QA does is they have the time to do these extremely simple but time-consuming and tasks, and what the best thing about this, it frees the developers from constant worry, and a lot of features I don't have to do with that they would be too complicated to test, because I don't want to release broken games. And when I was working in the proper games industry and had the QA behind me, it's such a safety net always that even if you mess up, there's someone there to still try it and catch up shit, and you can trust it. But when you're an indie developer, that bug you do that you don't catch go straight to the end users, and that's just something that shouldn't ever happen.
Well, it's definitely very easy, just based on, your history to compare the launch of Day Repeat Day to the launch of Returnal, since you previously worked at Housemarque. And
yeah.
I've seen an enormous amount of writing from people talking about how there are things that they feel are deeply impacting their experience playing the game. The ability to save on an individual run in Returnal. I even saw an incredibly hyperbolic headline that says, "Is it safe to play Returnal yet?" And well, that's a little ridiculous, but it feels like even at scale, these moments still exist. So
yeah, well, I don't want to say any bad about Housemarque, because a lot of my friends are still
right
there, and I kind of feel like if I didn't take this step to indie, I would actually right now have been releasing Returnal, and a strange feeling that I could have been doing the biggest game on PS3 right now, but I released a tiny game that pretty much no one plays, so it's complicated. But in regards to their game, I think in all that kind of major, huge tentpole releases, the problem is that they are really tight deadlines, and all the bugs in there, most of them they already know, but they still release the game because they think the bugs are not significant enough, and they will patch it before it becomes an issue, but still some slips through, and it's mostly just time. And if you saw the thing that they released a new patch that actually started deleting some people's save games, and I just can imagine the horrible feeling some of the programmers out in that company right now have, and the stress they are going through, that must be terrible.
And my observation is in no way meant to be a criticism of them. It's more an observation about the way games media works.
Yeah.
Like games media doesn't seem to express scale very well. Everything is either the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world. So if there's an experience which is, diminishing a small number of players' experience in a game which is the single largest exclusive reason to buy a PS5 right now, then outlets feel the need to blow it wildly out of proportion. For the record, Resogun is probably one of my favorite games ever. So shout outs to Housemarque, they're fantastic.
Yeah, that was the last game I worked while I was there. And then after Resogun, I started my indie thing.
Well, then, thank you for giving me a reason to keep my Vita on my nightside table. So one of the things I'm curious about what you'd have to share is you've had some stuff to say online about the cost of indie development and risk versus reward. There was a tweet of Rami Ismail's that you retweeted where he was talking about the race to the bottom for passionate indie developers, and you retweeted him and you said, know your math. And if I'm remembering right, it feels like in the last few months, more than once you've said that either you were still living on Barbarian money or this was a result of the money from Barbarian. I kind of want to get your insight into what you mean by know your math and how indie developers can and should approach budgeting.
I don't have any great insight into this, but the know your math thing is all about, I see so many indie developers going blind into the whole thing, thinking that they're going to make a great game and then put it on Steam and they're going to be a success, but that's just not going to happen ever. For example, if you look at my indie career, I've been doing this 7 years, and Barbarian is the only game that has turned profit. So I worked 5 years out of my savings, and when Barbarian was released, I was completely out of money, and if it hadn't sold at all, then this would have been over. So you really need to know what you're trying to do. Are you trying to just make an art game and don't care what it sells, or are you trying to make a profession out of this for yourself? And if you're trying to do that, then you need to know how many copies do you sell, compare your games to other games, how much do they sell, and just keep on top of the whole situation, because that's very rare in beginners. But I guess it's kind of natural to, for example, Day Repeat Day on Steam so far has sold 20 copies, and that's it. If I put this on Steam and nowhere else, I would have made $100 on 1.5 years work. So that's obviously not a very good business. So I'm trying to be as transparent as I can, just so that there's not people out there thinking I'm living the dream and they want to do the same because I'm constantly releasing high quality games and selling millions or whatever. It's not like that at all. So
I wanted to talk a little bit about how games journalism can potentially impact sales. You once noted that there was a single article about Barbarian that was on Kotaku, and that you could link 300 sales of the game to the Kotaku piece. There was some, not a great deal, but like there was some writing at large about Day Repeat Day. There was a review on Touch Arcade, and Touch Arcade named it a game of the week. Did any of that writing, as near as you can tell, translate into sales?
Well, on Day Repeat Day, the only significant article was the Touch Arcade Game of the Week, and there wasn't anything beyond that. And I think that netted me something like 100 sales, or maybe. And as you said, the Kotaku article, and Kotaku is one of the biggest sites, so obviously it's important, but 300 sales, or what did you say? I can't remember anymore. That's not that much.
Right.
Because if you want to make your money back after years of work, you have to sell tens of thousands of copies or 10,000 copies, and that's just a drop in the ocean. And the meaning of those sites is to less and less in terms of sales. But the good thing about them is that it gets the name out there, so maybe you get new contacts or some other people find out about your game. For example, I suspect that when Day Repeat Day got some featuring on Apple's App Store, I can imagine that they found it out through Touch Arcade. I'm not sure because they never tell me anything, but that kind of thing is a good thing. But direct sales just doesn't happen. I think the biggest sales influence nowadays is on like streamers and that kind of market, and the actual writing articles is less and less nowadays.
I am absolutely willing to draw that through line between Touch Arcade to the curation on the Apple Store. It definitely does feel like week after week that when Touch Arcade calls out games as being good, that they'll end up next week being featured in the new games we love section of the App Store. So if you're not willing to draw that through line, I am. Which I guess like feeds directly into my next question, which is that like, so after there was that like minimal amount of formal game writing around the piece, there was a little bit of streamer activity. You know, I did like hop onto YouTube to see like what kind of video population there was for the game. And I definitely saw some. And then came like the App Store focus in new games we love. Did YouTube or the Apple curation lead to sales at all?
Apple curation is on iOS premium games is probably the best exposure you can get, and it got some featuring on the Today tab and some on the Games tab. So I think it led to something like 300 sales. So the total sales numbers right now on iOS is like 500 copies. So it's actually much better than I expected, but not like in a commercial way. But I'm really happy that it got some sales, but it's still not a business. That's how you could describe it. It's nowhere near a business, but it's great to get it out there. And as for YouTube or any streaming, that hasn't helped at all, because there's no anyone who has kind of a big viewership or anything. Those streamers are really hard to get, and I would probably have to pay like tens of thousands of dollars to get on some of those, and it's just impossible unless you have something really, really popular right now, or something that hits whatever the current zeitgeist is. Right.
So, you know, like kind of shifting back to the idea of like cost forecasting and the risk of game development, something that you have mentioned in the past is that you would be interested in collaborating more because you like working in a team environment, but that the risks are very high and that it's like hard to forecast financial success for collaborating in an indie space. Are there any dream collaborations that you would like to have happen? Are there opportunities you would like in terms of collaboration that you see yourself just not being able to take because of the risk?
Well, The number one thing I would like to collaborate is with my friends, but because indie development is so financially difficult, and all these people, I mean, are actually having a high-paid job in games companies and wherever, so that's impossible basically, unless you really go at it and try to find funding and start really proper business.
Right.
But creatively, I don't know. I don't really have a dream collaboration in that way. But the thing with collaboration in general is that because there's no money in this, so I can't pay a salary to anyone. So then the collaboration becomes based on voluntary work. And when it's based on that, it's really, really easy to walk away from it.
Right.
And that happens to 9 out of 10 people when the development gets serious, because then it's no longer fun, it's actual work, and you're not getting paid. And that's where the collaboration ends with 99% of people. So if I were to take on that kind of collaboration, then the risk would be a lot of wasted time. I just prefer not to do that. But it's really difficult to find that kind of perfect match of similar people. There's also the other thing that when you're talking to people like me or other indie developers, we really we really are into this because we like our own ideas. And when you bring more people, then it's not a job; it's a collaboration. It sometimes can creatively get harder and harder because everyone has their own ideas, and there's no structure, or you don't have the authority to tell someone that now it's going to be this way because there's no money involved or any power or that kind of thing. So there's all kinds of issues that I prefer to avoid in terms of collaboration. But I really do miss the teamwork aspect of working in a larger team. I am constantly hoping that maybe someday I can actually start a bigger company, but you never know how this goes.
Sure. We've talked some about the difficulties of finding visibility on the Steam store. In fact, on this podcast, we used to do a recurring segment called What Came Out on Steam Today, just to highlight how rapidly games come out. When we would do the segment, we would generally discover that between 12 to 16 games had come out by the time we were done recording in any given day.
Yeah.
And a similar issue with visibility on the Apple App Store. But something that we haven't really talked about yet is visibility and the developer experience with Nintendo. Barbarian is available on Switch. And so I wanted to, get some insight into how that development experience and publishing experience has contrasted with Apple and Valve.
Well, Nintendo is different that way that they have a really strict NDA, so I can't talk about much in terms of how it actually works. But for what it's worth, I was really happy, and it was an easy thing to do in the end. And I actually, when Barbarian was released in 2018, I already tried to contact Nintendo that could I do a port right away, but they were much more strict in who they allow on the platform back then, and I kind of gave up on it. But then was it a year later or more, they started opening up the platform more, and I tried again and got in. And once you got in, the process was really simple, and it's not that different from Steam or iOS, except that their console platforms, you have these rules called TRCs or whatever technical requirements. It's called different on all platforms, but you have to do that. For example, you have to support the controllers in certain way, or the buttons need to do something, or you need to save the game in some way, and it cannot do this or cannot do that, but that's different to PC and iOS, because on PC and iOS you can do whatever you want. But other than that, it's pretty similar, and I didn't have any issues with it.
I'm assuming that because of the initial sales numbers on Steam and iOS, that a day repeat day Switch port is unlikely. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, it's very unlikely, and there's the issue that on Switch I would probably have to make a controller version too, so that would even increase the development time, and there's just no reason to do it.
Well, all the more reason for people to play a game on their phone, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
So I did want to kind of like touch on the idea of like how one game could potentially lift another, and I wanted to find out if this played out, because when I played Day Repeat Day, I absolutely loved it, and I thought, holy shit, this guy's brilliant, and I immediately went and I bought everything else of yours on the App Store. Was there much of that happened? Like, does releasing one game lift your back catalog?
It's actually surprising in that it doesn't. The way to do it would be to put the advertisements for my other games into the game, but I think it would take away from the game, and I don't really want to do that. So the effect isn't really noticeable. And
okay.
When I made this game called Drift and Drive, and after I released it, Apple wanted to feature on this, or Starbucks wanted to feature it this way, that they had these free games in their Starbucks, and you could pick up a card that had a code for the game out there. And I thought that this would be a great marketing opportunity for my next game. You know, when they pick up Drift and Drive for free, so they would also go check out my next game. And I had a little icon in Drift and Drive for the next game too. So I made the next game really fast, put it out into the store before the Starbucks thing was released, but it had zero effect, and that really surprised me. So it's kind of people don't really, at least in my games, don't really stick to the developer that much, if you know what I mean.
So I'm mainly just a weirdo outlier there.
You're a game enthusiast. Those are the people that usually check out my other games, but that's a rare breed, I think.
We've talked so much about Day Repeat Day. I did want to lift and shout out, like Barbarian as well. What an absolutely cool game. Like, it feels like there's a natural through line in the way the player engages with strategy and planning in level shapes, and like just the waves and hordes of enemies in that game. It felt a lot to me as a player like managing the map in a Dynasty Warriors game.
Yeah, well, Dynasty Warriors was definitely a large influence in it. That I wanted it to have that kind of a massive battles beyond what you usually get in games, and also that I wanted to make it feel manageable, so that it never becomes overwhelming, and you always know what you need to do, even though there are hundreds and sometimes thousands of units on the screen. It's a kind of a love letter to arcade games that I like, and that kind of old school, really simple action games that do not have any experience bars,
right,
bars or levels or inventories. I just wanted to keep it really simple and really like that kind of pure design.
Yeah.
And
like I definitely felt like a connection to Dynasty Warriors, and I felt a connection to like Robotron. The purity of the idea that like no one enemy is the thing that's going to kill me, the player. My lack of planning on what to do minute to minute is the thing that will kill me.
Yeah, definitely, and there's a lot of coordination in the design of the enemy units, so that you can't never like just sit still and kill them all. There's always someone trying to like get you to move, or have to kind of think about the strategy, and it also tries to change it through the worlds. That by introducing new elements. So you constantly have to kind of keep on track of what the best strategy here is.
So talking more about like budgeting and like how indie developers get funding, there have been in like the last just few months absolutely extraordinary games which have released through Apple Arcade. We saw the release of Fantasian, Clap Hands Golf, stuff that like if Apple had not provided funding wouldn't have seen development completed. I wanted to talk about how game subscription services can potentially impact funding for developers. Like, has trying to get a game into Apple Arcade been something that you've considered?
Yeah, it's definitely something I've considered, but it's a new thing, the whole arcade thing, and the only game so far I've done since then is Day Repeat Day, and that's not probably something that they would take. I never tried to pitch it anything, but it's and subscription services are great for funding something that probably wouldn't get their money back through sales. But for subscription services, they're kind of like a variety option that increases the value of the subscription and brings variety into it. You know, like Netflix or whatever does a lot of different things that it's hard to quantify if they worth it, but still bringing that kind of prestige to the platform, and they're still, in that way, they're worth making. But I do think that it's getting harder and harder to sell single-player premium games like mine, and I'm not sure if this thing I'm doing is viable 5 years from now, or are we all going to have to sell these games through subscription services? Because Apple Arcade on Apple App Store, I would imagine it takes a decent chunk away from actually selling premium games there too. So I'm not sure. I haven't tracked anything, but it seems the way the industry is moving towards that kind of a single players go to subscription and multiplayers are free, and free-to-play games are different again. But we'll see how it goes, I guess.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about like people who, I guess, interact with your games. You tried to make an older title of yours, Puzzle Bonsai, free. And it seems to have like uncorked some awfulness because like there's a level of entitlement that people who seek out exclusively free games on app stores have. And you ended up taking down Puzzle Bonsai, and I think it would be fair to say that like the reason you took it down was those toxic players and like the reviews they were leaving.
Yeah, so what happened with that game is that it's a really old game, and I didn't really support it anymore, but I liked it. No one was buying it, and I thought I'd just drop it free like that. But what ended up happening is that it started getting horrible reviews, like, and I got a few emails about that some things in it are broken, and it's kind of a weird thing that other ways do that. When people pay for something, they are bound to pay more attention to the game itself and give it time. But if it's free, they play it 5 seconds, and if they don't like it, it's gone, and they're gonna fire that stupid email to the developer or whatever, and it just feels kind of pointless to deal with that. And I understand it, because I bet most of those reviews that I got were from, I don't know, children or some people who just don't know any better, so I don't mind it.
Sure.
It's the kind of thing I don't want to deal with, basically. I just don't want that kind of a negativity in my life for free, so I just decided to take it down, because it's not that important game to me anymore, and I might someday remake it, or we'll see. I would actually release a few of my old games free right now, but the deal with that is that exactly that if I really release them free, it's gonna take a lot of time and mental power from me to deal with all the negative feedback and problems people are going to send me. So I'm just gonna keep them paid and save myself the trouble, which is really, really weird, I guess, but that's the way it goes.
These jerks ruined it for all of us, because I played Day Repeat Day and I went like buying up all the rest of your games, and I was like, oh, I guess I can't get Puzzle Bonsai now, jerks. I certainly do hope that it, I guess, reemerges at some point, even if there is a cost associated with it.
Yeah, it was originally a Flash game, actually, and Flash has gone away too, and it's surprisingly hard to keep old games alive.
Yeah.
But maybe someday.
That was something I was giving a fair bit of time to thinking about this week. The death of old games, not just because of Sony intimating that they were going to shut down the PS3 and the Vita stores and then backtracking on that. I was trying to find how many of the good games that were available through Xbox Live Indie Games platform for the 360 ever got ported to other platforms, because Microsoft shut down that portal on Xbox. And so there's just so many of these games that were sold through that portal, which is no longer available, and there's no other way to get them. And unless you have a 360 where it's already installed, like, they're out.
Yeah.
You know, like, preservation is just so important, and I don't think it gets nearly enough attention.
Yeah. There's a huge amount of games that never see the light of day or disappear really fast. I think 1/3 of the games I worked on are nowhere anymore and not even preserved anywhere. For example, at the beginning of my career, I worked on some games on platforms like Palm OS or Gizmodo, which was a weird thing back in the day, but you can be sure never to find those games again anywhere. So it's interesting how this culture disappears really fast, and people who do those emulators and that kind of preservation work are the real heroes in that kind of field. It's a real shame to see this go away, but I guess it's natural in this kind of a technological industry.
Right. So what platform was Smilers for?
That was just a Windows game. I think it actually still works on the new Windows. The Windows platform is great in that it's really compatible to like decades back to whatever, and surprisingly, I think I sometime a year ago tried to run it again, and it's a 20-year-old game and it still worked, and that's really surprising. It's not a great game, but it works.
The story you shared on Twitter about a fan reaching out to you saying that, like, Smilers was the game that made them connect with video games was, like, so lovely and so cool. And it definitely underscored for me, like, the need for people to, I guess, share their positive experiences with games, because the signal to noise ratio on social media platforms is just so bad. Make sure that developers know that you appreciate their work is what I hope my listeners take away from this. Like, I love Day Repeat Day, and that's why we're, you know, like, having this conversation today. But have you had many other experiences, like the person reaching out to you about Smilers, where somebody just says, your game really touched me, like, I really connect with your work?
Well, not that deeply. That was a really special thing, because I have never ever heard that anyone else has played Smilers.
Right.
Back in the day when I was like 18 or 19, I had this games website that had a few local games that I mock reviewed in my youth, and I just put my own game there, and I never heard from anyone that anyone ever played it. And at some point the website, I took it down, and it's just been sitting in my arcade since then. And then one day I got this weird message saying from Mexico, of all places, that halfway around the world, that someone really liked that game, and it was on some kind of a pirate CD or whatever, and that really made my day. And I read every review anyone ever writes about my games, so if you have anything positive to say, it's not that common I get contacted or people write about my games. So sometimes someone really loves a game and we exchange a few emails or whatever, but that's like happens once a year or something like that. So if that's one thing I want to say, that if you really like a game by anyone independent or a small developer, send them an email or write a great review, and you can be sure that they really appreciate it and are really feeling happy about that.
Absolutely. During development for Day Repeat Day, something that you tweeted was, I went running and now I have another idea for my game that I just have to do. And so I'm curious if the idea that you had to do was the hyperconnect numbers, because you mentioned that those happened relatively late in development. This tweet was from November of last year. And then you said that you have another idea that you would make if you had the budget. And then you said you'd never go running again. So I'm just kind of curious, based on like the timing of this tweet, were those the hyperconnect numbers?
Yeah, that was exactly that, yeah.
Okay, cool. And can you share what the other idea was? Like, is that, like, right now you're doing very open development about the game that you're currently working on. You have like a threaded tweet where you're kind of like walking people through the game dev experience and being very, very public about it. Is this game that game?
No, that second tweet was kind of hyperbolic. That you know how game developers get ideas every week
Right.
and every day. So that was something I was really excited about that point. But a lot of these ideas that you get die really fast because of practical issues. Like I'm not even sure what idea that was, but if it's the one I remember, I would need something like a 5 million budget, and no one's gonna give me that. And I always just write them down. I have a huge list of game ideas, which I think everyone who makes games has, and sometimes I go back there and see if there's anything actually worthwhile in there. Mostly it's just something that, how can I be so stupid that I wrote that down, but yeah, it's all about getting excited about those ideas and seeing if there's any value in that. And if you're into games, you're gonna have a million ideas like that.
This is a bit of a pivot, but I wanted to talk about, speaking of like large sales, and needing, I guess, like a budget of 5 million. I wanted to talk a little bit about this like absolutely ridiculous email that you looked like you got at the beginning of 2018, where somebody was like, I want to buy 50,000 keys from you so that way I can mine Steam trading cards. And like, I assure you that this is the way to the top for your game. These kind of like ridiculous schemes, which are like tied to like the Steam platform. Like, how often do you get mail like this, where somebody's like trying to rope you into these like farcical schemes?
That was really far out. I don't get that kind of often, but for example, when I released Day Repeat Day a few weeks ago, every day I get a bunch of theme curator emails that are supposedly really into games and want to review my games because they're super interesting at it, and I just have to send them like 2 or 3 keys for whatever reason, and it just never ends. There's always a scammer out there who is trying to make $1 or $2 out of anything, and it's really frustrating too, because you really get to see how much people are just trying to grift pennies out of your work, which isn't selling anything anyway. And sometimes there are that kind of a real scam artist. I don't even know what that trading card thing was about, but it's so obvious that it's not gonna help me at all that usually I just delete these without even reading.
Man, I know that when I reached out to you regarding setting up this interview, one of the things that I said that I wanted to do was that I wanted to buy 5 copies of this game for my ridiculously tiny Patreon for this podcast. And what was the best way to buy those 5 copies? Are people mindful of that piece? Like, do people look for the best way to buy games from a developer? Something I've tried to tell people is that if you're going to buy this game right now, the best place to buy it is iOS. That was my guess because it seems to be that that's where it has the best shot of getting visibility. But I'm not certain. That's something that you can speak to. Like, is there a best place to buy your games? Is that something that customers should try and care about?
It's kind of hard for a customer to know how much the stores take. For me, the best thing right now is iOS because Apple took the cut that if you make under $1 million, I think they only get 15% of your price. On Steam, that is 30%. So I get more money if you buy it on Apple. But also, I think that I'm not sure how close the actual prices are. So there's difference because on Steam you can price every country separately and you have to do it kind of manually and adjust the prices, whereas on Apple I just get to pick a tier that sets Apple decided value prices for each country, and it's really difficult for even me to judge what's the best for me for someone to buy the game is without spending a lot of time on it. But basically I've been doing this 7 years and no one has ever asked me what's the best way to buy my games, so you're the first in that regard, and I'm just more happy that there's actually people like you who are genuinely interested in this game. So that's worth a lot more to me than 5 sold copies, because this is as we talked about, this is not going to sell much, and it's more like a personal project for me. So I'm not that invested in it financially. I'm just hoping that there are people who really get it and enjoy it.
Oh, yeah. It has brought me great pleasure because I have the patrons of the show as friends on my Steam platform, and it has brought me happiness every time I've seen one of them log in and play the game, and to get communication from the patrons saying like, hey, this is a really good game. I'm like, no, go tell him. No shit. I know that it's a good game. Go tell him that it's a good game. He's the dev. He needs to hear it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about Victor Spumante.
Oh, no.
What do you mean, oh, no? Like...
Which version? The one in the very big day or the jam version?
The jam version.
Okay.
Will Victor Spumante ever ride again? Are you done with Victor Spumante? Like, there's a level of, like, irreverence and shitposting and, like, silliness to this, which is a lot of fun. Like, you're very obviously goofing. And, like, looking at the work of yours that I've had an opportunity to play so far, that tone doesn't seem common or, I'd say, pervasive in your work. Like, there's a measure of levity to, like, say, Barbarian, but it's a different kind of levity.
Yeah.
This seems like very, very silly in, like, a very different way. So, like, will we ever see more of, like, this? Will we see more of Victor Spumante? Will we see more of this kind of game from you? Like, this is so silly. This is so goofy.
Well, I have a few concepts that are that, but I think that when I made that game, I was really interested in like doing some kind of an improvisational game, because that's really hard to do in games because they're really technical and you have to spend a lot of time on small details and really getting these ideas and making them. There's a lot of time before the idea gets to the screen, and with that jam game I tried to just put everything in there as fast as I could and just move onwards in that kind of fast way. So I really would like to work in that way, and I have this concept where I've been thinking about that it would be really interesting to do a full game that way, that every week I write a kind of an improvisational story and I have no idea where it's going, and I update the game every week and make that for like 3 months in a row and see where it goes. But that would be a really hard thing to do, and I haven't had the courage actually to do it yet. But I've been thinking about it, and I really like to make that game too. Because usually when I make games, they're really polished, and I try to get the details right, and that's the kind of a person I am. I'm really detail-oriented, so when I just can let go like that, it's really freeing and fun to just let go and see what happens. A few of those hyper scenes in Day Repeat Day are kind of written like that too, but they're not so free because I have to keep the story somewhat intact.
Right. I don't think that the silliest moment in Day Repeat Day has got anything on like the wacky visual novel stuff or the Victor Spumante just becomes Katamari goofiness. Like,
yeah, for sure.
It's some wild shit. It's very cool. So I'll keep my fingers crossed that at some point you can find the space to like do that kind of like improvisational development. It's such a joy to go back and like read this thread where you're like, okay, I'm done with this part. I'm going to go eat lunch, and then you just come back and then it gets weird, and like it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, kind of part of that experience is the Twitter thread too, so you can kind of follow like what I'm thinking and what's going on. So I think it kind of is a part of that whole game too, that to see that how it happened.
Yeah, it's definitely like counting the rings on a tree or just being able to trace the evolution of it. So much of the experience of that is reading through the game jam development of it. I wanted to talk a little bit about localization. You've talked a little bit about like the experience of localization for Barbarian. You said localization is something that is super fascinating and super annoying. In other news, new languages are coming to Barbarian. So what is super fascinating and what is super annoying about localization?
Well, an annoying part is that it's really technical, that if you have any dynamic text in your game, then the way you combine the words and construct the sentences or whatever, it becomes really complicated in different languages because they work differently or have different ways to say things, and there's all kinds of these kind of different little rules you have to know, like where to break the line in Japanese or Chinese, or it's just a lot of things to manage, and in a way it's not work where I can see the results because I don't understand the text at all. But it's also really rewarding in that kind of way that you can provide more access to your game, and because English is really dominant language in this scene, obviously, and just helping people from other countries see your game. And also I like to work with independent local translators, so that's what I like to just be able to provide a little bit of tiny work to other kind of freelancers like me, and so on. And the fascinating, I'm not sure if the fascinating is actually right word there, but for me language is a bit weird because I wrote this really large narrative game in Day Repeat Day that it has a lot of text and stories, but I had to write it in English, and it's not my native language, obviously, and it's not my heart's language in a way. I can manage, and I'm not sure how it came across to a native English speaker, but I can't write a game in Finnish because no one will buy it. The market is so small, and it would be completely pointless. And I would still love someday to get to write in my own language, but if you want to get your thing out there, it's just not possible. That's kind of a weird thing in this globalized society we're living in, that I cannot make anything locally here, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there's an enormous amount of privilege that English-speaking gamers, and specifically English-speaking gamers in the United States, very frequently take for granted.
Yeah, for sure.
Just today I was sitting around thinking like, man, like there's some games from like level 5 which haven't been localized that I would love to play. And then I'm like, wait a minute, like why am I sitting here groaning about stuff from level 5 that hasn't been localized? Every other game is localized for my market. Why am I bitching about this?
Yeah, and I have young nephews and nieces, and they really can't play these English-speaking games, even if there was for children,
Right.
because we start learning English at age 9 or 10 or something like that. So it's impossible from them to get access, and even they can't even play my games if I wanted to, because I have to make them in English. But actually, I translated Barbarian to Finnish by myself, mostly because I wanted my nephew to be able to play it. That's the only reason.
That's so sweet. And I hope he liked it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think he did.
I wanted to, I guess, talk about what I think is a possible influence on Day Repeat Day. It was a game that I thought about while playing through it the first couple times, and so digging back through your tweets, seeing that it was a game that resonated with you was kind of an aha moment. The Witness. Is there an influence there? Is there any through line between The Witness to Day Repeat Day? It feels like the way that the games approach mystery as part of narrative feels similar.
Maybe that it's somehow subconsciously influenced, but I don't think haven't really thought about that game in relation to Day Repeat Day. But I really love the way that game introduced you to everything, because I really think that it's a masterwork of design in integrating the world with your gameplay and story. And I think I don't really have very many game influences in this game. I think I was more influenced by what I'm reading, like news articles and books, and I have to say one game that really threw my design thinking around about those times, which might be a surprising game, but it's an iOS game called Florence, if you played that.
Yes, wonderful game.
That was really something that completely blew my mind in how you can tell a story by just game mechanics and not feeding it to the player with a spoon.
Yes.
Directly telling what happens. I think that was such a beautiful piece of design that that's something that probably influenced this game a lot.
Oh, man, Florence was extraordinary. It absolutely left me wounded.
Yeah.
And when I think about the arc of the titular character's relationship in that game, by the time I guess for our listeners, spoilers for Florence, by the time you're breaking up in that game, you're just so invested, and the way that it communicates so much through mechanics is absolutely extraordinary.
And yeah,
now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, I could see a through line from Florence to The Witness, because the way those games communicate to the player is through mechanics. They're not spoon feeding narrative easily. They're telling their stories with the way that you interact with the game.
Yeah, and Florence is so simple and minimal in the way you control it, and it still manages to convey all that feeling and meaning. That it's just so beautiful design that I absolutely love it. There's nothing extra there. There's nothing that forces gameplay in there that in a way that you would have to game some system, because it has to be a game that works a certain way games usually work, but it just manages to do whatever it wants to do and convey that story in a really minimalistic way, and I absolutely love it.
So I wanted to circle back to something that you put on Twitter at one point. You provided a top 10 favorite video games of all time list.
Did I?
You did.
I can't remember anymore. It's probably different every day.
So at the time, you said that your top 10 favorite games were Pro Evolution Soccer 2, Dead Space, Grim Fandango, The Dig, Kickstart 2, Dark Souls 3, Total Annihilation, Civilization 2, Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, and Bubble Bobble.
Well, that's a good list.
It is a good list, and so I wanted to find out like if that list has changed at all.
Well, I still think Bubble Bobble is the best game ever made. I think it's a beautiful design. It has co-op, it has a great story, it has secrets, it has all the good qualities of a great arcade game. But those lists are usually influenced by whatever I'm thinking that day. But yeah, I love all those games. I think that's nothing different. The recent game I really loved is maybe a bit surprising, but Red Dead Redemption 2. I was really surprised that I loved it so much because I don't usually go for that kind of super mainstream giant epics, but the way they told the story of Arthur was just so beyond what I think we've seen in games a lot of. It really immersed me into that world and had a lot of impact in a way.
On Bubble Bobble / Puzzle Bobble, have you seen that there is a Puzzle Bobble VR coming to Oculus Quest?
No, I'm not that into VR. Actually, I have to say that I don't actually like Puzzle Bobble. I don't like that game actually. But Bubble Bobble is the one I love.
Okay.
Strangely enough.
I wouldn't call it strange.
Yeah, VR is something I haven't really got into at all yet. I think that I'm just not compatible with the technology yet, but we'll see how it develops, because obviously it's going to be huge at some point, I think.
So I guess back to Red Dead Redemption 2 for a second. Is it the writing for the characters that connected you to that game? Like, is it the narrative? Because you called Final Fantasy 15 a disaster in every way. And both feel like very, very large open world experiences.
Yeah, I think Red Dead Redemption had a really solid and focused story of the lead character, and he was acted so well. I think that's one of the best acting performances ever in games. But in regards to Final Fantasy 15, I never understood whatever the story was trying to tell me, and they did the story in a way that you would have to watch some movies beforehand and read some, I don't even know what, and the whole gameplay in that game was just not compatible with me at all. To me it was super simplistic but button mashing, and I just don't like the direction they took it at all.
You did mention around the time that you were playing it that you were having difficulty finding any JRPGs worth playing for the PS4. Did you ever find one?
Well, I'm not sure if I searched any that much, but I actually completed the Final Fantasy VII Remake just a few weeks ago, and I think that was much better than 15, and I liked it. And then I'm really interested in the turn-based Yakuza. Was it 7 or something? And I haven't still played it, but that's something that's on my list that I would love to try.
There was some stuff that was going on with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, where the game kind of approaches the history of Final Fantasy VII like metatextually, which I found really interesting. Like, it was a good game, and it also allowed itself to be like a game about games, which I think is hard to do without coming off as pretentious. But I think they stuck the landing.
Yeah, and it was really like free, and they didn't like try to be too serious and go into, I don't know, these super brooding epic moments that sometimes bog the series, in my opinion. But I think it was really loose and free in that way. That there were some parts I didn't like, obviously, but overall I think they made a great job with that, and it's interesting to see how they handle the second part.
So it looks like, again, like I'm just so happy that digging through your Twitter history, seeing like, oftentimes it looks like there is a history of us like having shared taste in media, and there's a television series that I have like been yelling at people to watch for years because it's so darn good. which is The Returned.
Oh, that's a great series. I absolutely love that.
Yeah. If we could, like, I guess, shift away from games for a moment. Like, one, I just wanted to, like, bask in just how good The Returned is. My goodness. Like, no, I don't hear nearly enough people talking about how great that show is.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to, like, find out if there's other media outside of games that you would recommend to people if they find themselves a fan of your games. Like, if people like your games, what should they go watch? What should they go read?
Oh no, you're putting me on the spot. I would probably have a list, but I'm really bad at thinking about these things on the moment. I read a lot of different stuff and a lot of different kind of movies and television series, and when COVID didn't close down everything, we used to go to the theater too. And if there's anything I would like to say is that usually game developers or nerds who are really into one exact thing would find it much more interesting to immerse them into really different kinds of stories and just diversify your what you're watching, because there's so much stuff out there that if you just stick to that one thing you like, then whatever you make is going to be boring. It's going to be just that one thing, and that's why a lot of the games are really similar and so on. For example, I absolutely love watching Bollywood movies, which might sound strange, but they're so different and colorful and such a different mood, and something that I would not expect anyone who makes this kind of games to say ever, and I've never met anyone in my circles who would watch them. And just watch everything around the world, not just the one thing you like from Marvel or DC or whatever the big budget thing, Hollywood thing right now. That's what I would say.
One of my absolute favorite movies last year was a Hindi language thriller named Bulbul. And my wife is extraordinarily passionate about Bollywood films, and so I often find myself in the blast radius of it because she watches them so often. And I've started to discover that there's this absolutely amazing variety to that kind of cinema, not just because of the diversity of languages spoken within India, but also there's entirely different cultures around production of film from different regions, and the types of movies the types of movies that they're making in Goa are nothing like the types of movies that are getting made in Mumbai, and with films from the Punjab are usually fraught with writing about the border conflict with Pakistan. It's fascinating.
It's a huge country with 1 billion people, so it's obviously going to have a lot of different points of view and views, and that's the most fascinating thing for me always, to see how different people from around the world handle the same stories, and that's key to what I do and how I think in a way. Even I'm not sure if it reflects in my work. That's something I recommend to everyone.
So, back in 2015, you dragged SteelSeries controllers for iOS pretty hard.
Oh no. That's a lot of time back.
The reason I bring it up is because I think that MFI controllers have come a long way for iOS. In 2015, I think that your description of the SteelSeries controller is very, very apt. I bought one around then, and my experience seems to pretty closely mirror yours, which is that there were lots of things wrong with it, and they didn't seem to particularly care about any of them. And I now have a backbone controller for my iPhone, and it effectively makes, in just every possible way, playing on my phone feel like playing on my Switch, which is very nice. So I wanted to, I guess, talk a little bit about how controller support for phones has changed, and Is that something that you try to be like mindful of as a developer, that like there is a population of people out there who want to play games on their phone and want to use controllers?
I'm not sure if it's just a vocal minority that do that, but some of the games I do are really, really designed to be based on a controller, even if they are on iOS, and there are virtual sticks that I try to make as good as possible. But really, if you want the best experience, you use a controller. And I think the real game changer on Apple for that was that they implemented support for PS4 and Xbox controllers. So that's the point where I think it became much more accessible and important.
Yeah.
I hope that Apple keeps supporting like more console-like gaming experience like that, and maybe does something games related with the Apple TV, but you never know with Apple, so interesting to see how it goes.
I feel like Apple TV right now is kind of a lost opportunity. Like as much good curation seems to be going on in the store, and it seems like their third-party relations is more actively like courting interesting games. I see a ton of great games on iOS and iPad, which I think would work just fine in the Apple TV space, which end up not having Apple TV ports, and I feel like that's a missed opportunity for them.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason why Apple TV couldn't be a really great games machine, but I'm not sure how invested Apple is in it right now, because they could do so much more with that in ways of games, and I think they're trying to now with the Apple Arcade, and every game on there I think is on Apple TV, so at least they're doing something, but it still feels kind of like a hobby project and something they would be throwing a lot of money at, and something they don't know if they really like this Apple TV that they're doing, or is it just something that happens to be there. I don't know really, but I really think Apple TV, like you said, is a lost opportunity, and it could be so much better. And maybe with the new M1 chips and whatever comes after, they could actually really, really beef the box up too, so you could get really modern-looking games. But interesting to see what happens with that too.
Yeah, I'm hopeful with seeing what the M1 chips will do to that space. The recent Apple showcase where they showed an iPad running, Divinity Original Sin 2, makes me hope that we'll see more demanding stuff on iOS and tvOS.
Yeah, I certainly think the CPU is capable of handling a really modern game. It's just that depends on how good a GPU they are able to put on that thing, or want to put on that thing to really drive the graphics to the next level.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to touch on something that you've previously said, which is I want to see the handprint of the author, not some perfectly polished, clean entertainment product that offends no one and has nothing to say. Read a Marvel movie. I'm personally trying to learn how to do that. I still suck at it. I feel the current big budget entertainment landscape is the perfect reflection of the modern world. You're not allowed to have any rough edges, or someone is going to put you down. The easiest way to breathe is to have nothing to say.
Well, that's the same kind of frustration that eventually led to Day Repeat Day. I think that every pop culture item is like huge. These huge movies, like Marvel movies, it's all leading to this kind of a monoculture where you only have this one focus-tested opinion on what's a good movie or not. But it's obviously driven by money, and I guess there's no arguing with that. But if you really want to get something more out of your entertainment, I really wish that I could see something like the person who's making it, who has a vision, and that vision isn't something that's just copied from whatever they liked previously. if that makes any sense.
I think it does. When I read this and then I think about some of the reporting that came out of internal memos recently from Sony, where Sony is now specifically targeting all of our internally developed video games have to be billion-dollar video games. That really saddens me as a player, because so many of the games that I love are smaller experiences which have very, very definite voices, where the game is trying to say something and it has a specific point. So just, hearing like, yeah, all of our games have to be huge and they have to be Uncharted or they have to be The Last of Us seems so exhausting and like off-putting. When I touch art, I want to connect with who made the art.
Yeah, that's why I see something, and I don't know. I've seen all the Marvel movies, but if you ask me what happened in the last Captain America, I have no idea. No, absolutely nothing stays in my head from that, because it's just so polished of every edge or every moment. And when the new Star Wars movies came out, and there was a lot of hate towards the second one. What was it called?
The Last Jedi.
The Last Jedi, but to me that was the only one of those three that actually had something that broke the mold, something memorable in it. And I'm referring to like Luke Skywalker drinking milk out of some weird alien. I have no idea how that got into the movie, but that's pretty much those are the moments I remember, because that's something that comes out of the blue and makes me happy that okay, I didn't expect that. And
so many of these like sanded down Disney movies seem to be designed not as film but as a giant theme park ride. And so like when you have like Luke Skywalker with like a bunch of like weird blue milk like running through his beard and tossing lightsabers over his shoulder off a cliff like he doesn't give a shit, or calling a lightsaber a laser sword in a way which is designed to tweak the audience. I like that, because that was the filmmaker advancing an idea to the audience. Maybe the way you emotionally relate to these movies is wrong. And instead of like most of the audience bothering to consider that or bothering to examine the idea that was being presented by the filmmaker, they just got mad. And I can't get behind that. That actually stood out to me as a distinct and memorable film. And the rest of them are theme park rides.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way I think about it too. That those are the moments I go in there for when I see a movie. I don't want to see the same movie again. I already saw Star Wars or whatever. Give me something new. Mm-hmm. But that's not actually what people want. They want the same experience again. But what they don't often realize that if they've given the same experience again, it's just a watered down version of the original, and it's never going to have the same impact for you that the original had.
So, like you've talked about like consuming lots of different kinds of art, so that way, as an artist, your work doesn't become like repetitive or derivative, and your work as a developer, at this point, like spreads across like quite a few different genres mechanically. Like nobody's going to confuse Puzzle Bonsai for Barbarian, and nobody's going to confuse Barbarian for Day Repeat Day. Where do you want to go and explore as a developer now? Like, what genre do you want to dip into because you haven't? And what ideas do you want to bring to that genre? Like, Day Repeat Day felt very transgressive, and it felt like it broke a lot of rules. What rules do you want to go break now?
Well, it's kind of an interesting question, because I've never done a sequel to a game. That's because usually when I finish a game, I'm so bored of that idea that I just cannot look at it again. But now the next game I'm making is actually the first sequel ever. And this time I just wanted to not take so much stress out of the whole experience and play to my strengths. In something that I know I can do. But what's after that? I think it's actually a kind of a weakness if you consider a career in business-wise that I never do the same thing again, because, like I said, that's what people want. If I made a sequel to Barbarian 2, it would obviously get more attention and it would sell much better than this new game, but it's just not something that's in me, and if I do something, the idea has to resonate somehow. Usually when I begin a game, I'm not 100% sure what's it going to be, so I'm not setting out to do something weird or something super different. It's just the way I work is really iterative, that I do something and then once it's there, I see what I like and what I don't like, and maybe new ideas come forth, and I repeat that process many times, and then finally when I find out that, hey, I actually like playing that game, I know that okay, we're somewhere. I don't really have a plan far in the future, but I would hope at some point in my career I could somehow direct a larger game that I could play more resources, because a lot of these games I have to really be really careful what kind of content I put in them and how they work, because I just don't have the money or time to do certain things, and that's a hard limit. I cannot take 5 years to do one part of game, so I think that's really one of the hardest limits I have when I'm doing games alone, that I really have to control myself, that what do I allow myself to do, if you know what I mean. And I don't really have any strict ideas what genres or whatever, but like I said, I have this 1,000-row game idea text file that grows every week, and sometimes it just something pops up, and there's also a very limited amount of games I get to do in my life. So when I finish a game, and it usually takes at least 6 months or maybe a year or year and a half, like day repeat day. So when I start a game, it has to at that moment really be something I can believe that it will in some way be enjoyable to work with, because I'm going to be stuck with it for a long time. So that's usually another factor that I really have to take into consideration.
I am absolutely very grateful that we had a chance to dig into your history as a developer, day repeat day today, some of the stuff that you've done during your time as an indie dev and where you're going and what your influences are. Thank you so much for putting aside this time. I want to make sure that you have all of the space right now to plug all of your stuff. So if you want to tell people what games to buy and where to go buy them, please do.
Well, you can find most of my games on Apple's App Store, and that's about it. I think you can find me online through show notes. Maybe you put some kind of link on it, and I don't really have much to plug right now, but if you're interested in what I do, you can follow me on Twitter, and I'm currently, like you said, blogging or live tweeting my next game, which I hope will be released this year. So I'm trying to be really open and show what I do, and hopefully show what I can't do and what I fail at. So it might be interesting to see, and thank you for having this chat. I've always said no to every podcast I've ever been asked on, but since you're the first one who actually really shown a lot of interest in the work itself, so I've been happy to have a chat with you.
Yeah, I really don't see a point of sitting down with someone. If you don't care about what they have to say, then why ask them to say it? So I'm glad that came through in my request. For folks who might be, I guess, new to this, who came to this because of this interview, this is Impossible Coin. You can find Impossible Coin pretty much wherever you can download a podcast, except with the incredibly frustrating exclusion of SoundCloud. Our Our logo is designed by Lauren Moran. Lauren is very talented. Follow her online at Lauren Moran and consider donating to her Patreon. She's enormously talented. Our theme music is by Big Sach. Big Sach is very talented. You can find him on SoundCloud, and you can follow him on Twitter at Illory_Swank. I run Impossible Coins Twitter, so if you want to talk to me, you can talk to me there. Rocky runs our Facebook, and Tegan runs our Tumblr. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.